The war was over. The Xanthari Empire, once a mighty force in the galaxy, was no more. Their capital, Xanthari Prime, was a burning ruin, and their fleet had been scattered into nothingness. No more Xanthari warships roamed the stars. No more Xanthari soldiers marched through their conquered worlds. Their empire had crumbled. But even in victory, the humans were not full of joy. Their victory was hard-won. The cost had been heavy. Many lives had been lost, human and Xanthari alike. The pain of Eli Ward's death still weighed on the hearts of those who had known him. The universe would never forget what had happened. The name Revenants would be whispered in fear for generations to come. No one would ever underestimate humanity again. Look. But as the galaxy fell silent, something else began to happen. From the ashes of war, humanity had begun to rise. And with them, a new future was being born. Back on Earth, the Supreme Commander stood before a giant hologram of the galaxy. For the first time in many years, he smiled. But it wasn't a smile of celebration. It was a smile of hope. The war was over. The galaxy was at peace. But the real work was just beginning. Humanity had fought for their survival and won. Now they had a chance to rebuild, to create a future where no one would dare attack them again, to become more than just warriors, to become leaders. The United Human Federation was born from the ashes of war. Nations around the world united under one banner. There were no more borders, no more divisions. Humanity was stronger than ever before. The galaxy watched as Earth began to heal. The cities that had been damaged in the war were rebuilt. The people who had been hurt started to recover, and the humans had learned a valuable lesson from their battle against the Xanthari. Never again would they allow themselves to be weak. Never again would they let others decide their fate. The Ghost Division, the silent warriors who had fought so hard for victory, now became something else. They no longer hid in the shadows. They no longer fought for revenge. Now, they were ambassadors. Now, they were protectors. They traveled to planets that had once feared humanity, spreading the message of peace, but always carrying the threat of justice for anyone who tried to harm their people again. They helped rebuild worlds that had been torn apart. They worked side by side with other races, teaching them the strength that came from unity. The Xanthari, those few who had survived the fall of their empire, were left with a choice: to rebuild their own lives or leave the galaxy forever. Some chose to stay. Some chose to leave. But the lesson was clear. Humanity was not weak. Humanity had strength that no one had expected. And as the years passed, the galaxy began to change. The balance of power shifted. Other species looked to humanity as a symbol of strength and hope. They saw the humans not as conquerors, but as protectors. The Revenants were no longer just warriors. They were leaders, guiding others toward peace and stability. The humans had proven to the universe that they could fight, but they could also build, teach, and protect. The Supreme Commander stood at the window of Blackstone Command, looking out at the stars. "The future is ours," he said quietly, "and it will be brighter than anything we've known." But his eyes were not just on Earth. They were on the stars, on the endless worlds that lay beyond. The message was clear. Humanity was not just another species in the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with. The Xanthari had learned that the hard way, and no one would forget it. The universe would remember the day when humanity took its place as the rightful guardians of the stars. It was no longer a question of whether the humans could survive. Now it was a question of how far they would go. And as the stars shone brightly above, the humans knew that their journey had only just begun. The Grand Hall of Xeltrax Prime was shining under 1,000 silver lights. It was a place built for peace. Today, humans and aliens had gathered to sign the biggest peace agreement in galactic history. Everyone thought the war between the stars would finally end. Ambassador Eli Ward stood tall at the front of the human delegation. He wore a black uniform with a silver Earth badge on his chest. His voice was calm as he spoke. We come with hope. We believe in peace." Across from him stood General Vorik of the Xanthari Empire. His sharp green eyes stared at the humans with cold hatred. The Xanthari had fought humans for 20 years, and now they were being forced to make peace. The room was silent as the two leaders approached the silver table to sign the treaty. News cameras floated in the air, broadcasting the moment lived to billions across the galaxy. Then it happened. A sudden flash of light. A loud crack. A plasma bolt flew across the room and struck Ambassador Ward directly in the heart. For a moment, no one moved. Ward's body fell to the ground, the treaty slipping from his hand. Gasps and screams filled the hall. Human guards pulled out their weapons, but it was too late. The assassin, hidden in the crowd, had already disappeared. General Vorik smiled, a slow, evil smile. He turned to his officers and said loudly enough for the cameras to hear, "Let this be a lesson. Humans are weak. We do not need peace with insects." Billions watched in shock. Across human colonies, there was a sudden silence. No anger, no speeches, no promises of revenge. Only silence. At first, the Xanthari celebrated. They held parties. They sang songs of victory. They believed the humans would be too broken to fight back. But behind the cold silence, something darker was moving. Far away on Earth, deep under the surface, in a place called Blackstone Command, the highest leaders of humanity gathered in a hidden room. Old generals with iron eyes, scientists with gray coats, agents whose names were erased from history. The Supreme Commander spoke only 3 words: "Activate Project Revenant." Nobody asked questions, they simply obeyed. The next day, a strange message spread across the galaxy. It was short, it was simple. It said, "You have killed one of ours. You have awakened what should have stayed asleep." Many aliens laughed. Some called it human theater, others called it an empty threat. But the oldest races, the ones who had fought humans long ago, remembered the name Revenant. They remembered the terrible stories. Stories about human weapons that didn't follow normal rules of war. Weapons that could not be reasoned with, could not be stopped. Fear started to grow. On Zeltrax Prime, General Vorik stood in his war room, watching the human message again and again. He was not afraid. He believed in the power of his fleets, his armies, his technology. He ordered his officers, "Send a message to Earth. Tell them if they want war, we will burn their worlds." The message was sent. No reply came. Another day passed. Then the strange disappearances began. In the outer colonies of the Xanthari, small military bases went silent. No explosions, no battles, just silence. When scouts were sent to investigate, they found only empty buildings. Weapons still in racks, meals still on tables. No signs of a fight, no blood, no bodies. Only one thing was found at each site: a silver coin. On one side, the coin showed the Earth. On the other, it showed a skull surrounded by 7 stars. Each coin was cold, ice cold, even in the heat. General Vorik began to worry. He called for reinforcements. He doubled the guards on all major worlds. But no matter how many soldiers he placed, bases kept disappearing. Back on Earth, in Blackstone Command, the Supreme Commander watched the reports come in. An officer turned to him and asked, "Sir, should we send a formal declaration of war?" The Supreme Commander smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what was coming. He answered, "They declared war the moment they killed Eli Ward. Now they will learn what war with humanity really means." And across the stars, in the dark corners of the galaxy, the revenants were already moving. Silent, invisible, the first whisper of Earth's true wrath. The mistake had been made, and there would be no mercy. The galaxy had changed. The once unstoppable Xanthari Empire was no more, reduced to a memory of what could have been. Their pride had been their downfall, And humanity's strength, their unity, had shown the universe what true power looked like. And now, humanity stood at the threshold of a new age. Hook. But even as peace spread across the galaxy, new challenges began to stir in the shadows. The universe was vast, and not everyone had learned the lesson of humility. The legacy of humanity's strength would be tested again. On Earth, life had returned to normal, but it was not the same. The world had changed forever. The United Human Federation, now strong and united, looked toward the future. Countries that had once fought each other now worked together. Every corner of the Earth had felt the power of unity, and the galaxy had taken notice. The Supreme Commander stood before a council of leaders. "We've won the war, but this is just the beginning," he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "We have proven that we are not weak, but now we must show the galaxy that we are not conquerors. We are protectors. We must guide the stars to peace." The revenants, once shadows in the dark, now stood as the symbols of that peace. No longer were they feared. They were celebrated. Their sacrifices in the war had turned them into heroes, symbols of humanity's resolve. They were everywhere now, not just as warriors, but as diplomats, teachers, and leaders. They brought people together, ensuring the future would be one of cooperation, not conflict. The survivors of the Century, those few who had chosen to stay in the galaxy, were given a choice. They could remain in the galaxy, under the watchful eye of the new Federation, or they could leave. Some chose to stay, deciding that they, too, could learn from humanity's example. Others left, taking their ships and their pride, vowing to never return. But even in the face of this choice, it was clear. The balance had shifted. Back at Blackstone Command, the Supreme Commander turned to his officers. His thoughts were focused not on the battles they had won, but on what was yet to come. "We've proven we can fight. We've proven we can survive," he said. "But now we must prove that we can build. The universe is full of threats, some old, some new. We must stay vigilant." He paused for a moment, looking out at the stars. "Our legacy will not be one of war. Our legacy will be peace, but peace takes strength to protect, and we will protect it." In the far reaches of space, though, a new enemy was rising. It was not the Century, nor any species they had ever encountered before. A strange signal, something none of their technology had ever been able to detect before, had begun to appear on the edges of the galaxy. It was not a threat, yet. But humanity knew better than to ignore such things. The revenants had become the eyes and ears of the galaxy. With their vast network of spies and contacts, they quickly found themselves monitoring the strange signals, gathering information from every corner of the galaxy. A new force was emerging, a mysterious, powerful race that seemed to move through space like shadows, undetected and silent. They had no name, and no one had ever seen them before. But humanity would not be caught off guard. Not again. Back on Earth, a new generation of soldiers, diplomats, and leaders were being trained. They were not just preparing for war. They were preparing for anything that the galaxy could throw at them. The legacy of their ancestors, the strength of their unity, was something they would carry forward. And above them, in the stars, the revenants prepared. The final message was clear. Humanity was not just a passing force in the galaxy. They were a new power. A force for peace, yes, but a force that would never hesitate to protect their own. The galaxy had learned the hard way that humanity was strong. And now, that strength would be passed down from generation to generation. They would keep their world safe. They would protect the stars. The galaxy watched. As the humans continued to rise, they carried with them the lessons of the past. They would never be weak again. And with each passing year, they would build something even greater. The legacy of humanity had just begun. The funeral of Ambassador Eli Ward was held on Earth. Under the open sky, millions of humans gathered, wearing black clothes. Billions more watched from every corner of the galaxy. Even those who lived on distant space stations and far colonies stood still to honor the fallen ambassador. A single black flag with a silver Earth symbol flew high above the ceremony. There were no speeches, no music, only silence. The coffin was made of dark steel, shining under the cold sun. As it was lowered into the ground, the sky itself seemed to darken. And then, it happened. A strange light appeared in the sky. First, it looked like a star growing brighter. Then it became a burning symbol, huge, impossible to ignore. It was a skull surrounded by 7 stars, the same design that was found on the coins left behind at the vanished bases. The symbol stayed in the sky for exactly 7 minutes. Not just above Earth, but above every human world. Even above some alien worlds where humans had no business showing power. Aliens who saw it first thought it was a trick. But when scientists tested the light, they found it was made of real energy, moving through space-time itself. It was not a hologram. It was a warning. On Zeltrax Prime, General Vorak watched the sky with growing fear. His advisors rushed into the war room, faces pale. "Sir," one shouted, "the Revenant symbol. It has appeared even over Xanthari Prime." General Vorak slammed his fist on the table. This is human fear-mongering, nothing more. But in his heart, he was not sure. Old Xanthari historians whispered among themselves. They remembered stories from long ago, when humans first came into the galaxy, not as farmers or traders, but as something else, something unstoppable. The Revenants were not just soldiers. They were hunters. They were ghosts. And once they were released, they never stopped until their enemies were destroyed completely. Back on Earth, Blackstone Command remained silent. They gave no interviews, no statements, no messages explaining the symbol. The Supreme Commander watched from his command chair as the funeral ended. An officer approached him. "Sir," she said, "alien governments are asking for talks. They are afraid." The Supreme Commander shook his head slowly. "Let them be afraid," he said. "They have seen our tears. Now they will see our teeth." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, something stranger was happening. Alien worlds that had once hated humans began to pull back their support from the Xanthari. Old enemies started calling for peace, not because they loved humans, but because they feared what was coming. Even the strongest pirate groups, known for attacking human ships, suddenly went silent. Whole fleets turned their ships around and disappeared into deep space. The galaxy was changing, and everyone could feel it. General Vorak, desperate to show strength, decided to attack a human colony near the neutral zone. He believed that humans were bluffing. He believed that if he struck fast and hard, humans would surrender again. He sent a fleet of 100 warships to the colony of New Horizon. The fleet arrived in orbit, ready to fire. But when their sensors scanned the colony, there was nothing. No cities, no lights, no humans, only silence. Confused, the alien captains ordered their soldiers to land and investigate. The landing teams found something chilling. In the center of the abandoned colony stood a single metal statue. The statue was of a human figure wearing armor, holding a flag with the Revenant symbol. At the base of the statue, there were words carved in deep letters. "You killed one. We will erase millions. Run while you can." Panic spread through the Xanthari fleet. Some ships tried to leave orbit, but before they could, the stars around them seemed to flicker and then vanish. Dozens of human stealth ships, completely invisible to normal sensors, appeared out of the darkness. Without warning, they attacked. Precise, silent, deadly. In less than 15 minutes, half of Vorak's fleet was gone. The rest fled into deep space, broken and afraid. General Vorak received the report later that day. His face, once proud and cruel, was now pale and shaking. He understood now. Humans were not bluffing. The Revenants were real, and they had already begun their terrible work. Back on Earth, the Supreme Commander stood alone in the empty funeral grounds, looking up at the fading symbol in the sky. He whispered to himself, "You should not have killed him. Now you will learn what humans become when they have nothing left to lose." The warning had been sent. The hunt had begun. The Xanthari Empire, once feared across the galaxy, was now a shadow of its former self. What had started as a strong, proud race, ruling hundreds of worlds, was now crumbling. General Vorik knew the end was near. He stood on the balcony of his high tower, staring out at the ruins of Zultrax Prime, the Xanthari capital. The streets that had once been filled with crowds of cheering citizens were now empty. The grand cities stood silent, covered in ash. The once great fleets, the pride of the Xanthari, had been scattered or destroyed. The Supreme Commander's words echoed in his mind. "You killed one. Now you will pay for your mistake." Look, one last strike. General Vorik had one final plan. He knew he had to act quickly before his entire empire fell into complete chaos. But there was one problem. The humans were already ahead of him. The revenants were coming to finish what they started. Across the galaxy, every corner of the Xanthari Empire felt the weight of their mistakes. Colonies that once served the Empire's needs now turned against them, some even welcoming human forces as allies. On the world of Thrallus, one of the last Xanthari strongholds, human soldiers landed and captured the High Command Center within hours. No Xanthari fleet came to save them. It was over. In every remaining Xanthari military base, soldiers tried to fight, but they were met by human ghosts, silent shadows that took them down one by one. At Xanthari Prime, the last stronghold of power, Vorik had no choice. He had no more weapons, no more fleets, and most of his generals had fled. Desperation and fear gripped his heart. Meanwhile, on Earth, in the heart of Blackstone Command, the Supreme Commander looked at the final reports. He knew it was time. The Xanthari Empire was finished. "Activate the final phase," he said, his voice cold and final. 1,000 fleets of human warships, long kept hidden in deep space, now began to move. The fleets were not here for conquest. They were here to end the war. Forever. The final phase began with a single command: decimate the heart of the Xanthari. Within hours, hundreds of ships surrounded Xanthari Prime, cutting off all escape routes. The remaining fleet was too small and too broken to fight back. The humans had calculated their final move perfectly. They waited, letting the Xanthari feel the crushing weight of defeat. General Vorik, surrounded by his remaining loyal officers, watched helplessly from his command center. The lights flickered. His communications were down. He could hear the roar of human ships approaching. "What are we going to do?" one of his officers asked, trembling. "We cannot fight them now." Vorik's jaw tightened. He refused to show weakness, but deep inside, he felt the terror. The Xanthari were finished, and there was nothing left to save them. On Earth, the Supreme Commander gave the final order: activate the Revenants. A terrible silence filled space. The Revenants, human soldiers who had been the ghosts of this war, were now activated in full force. They would not leave until the final stone of the Xanthari Empire had been turned to dust. Ships like shadows, they cut through the skies of Xanthari Prime. Cities were reduced to rubble. Armies were wiped out in the blink of an eye. The Xanthari had no way to defend themselves. In less than a day, Xanthari Prime was nothing but a burning world, with no survivors left. General Vorik stood on the edge of his balcony, staring out at the destruction. He knew this was the end. The Supreme Commander watched the final broadcasts from Xanthari Prime. He spoke to his officers. "It is done. They will never threaten humanity again." But he knew that there had been a terrible cost. The Revenants had brought their message loud and clear. There would be no mercy for those who attacked humanity. Not now, not ever. As the last of the Xanthari fleet burned in space, and their capital turned to ashes, the humans knew this war was won. But the victory was bitter. The cost of killing Eli Ward, the ambassador, had led to the deaths of countless innocent Xanthari. Many had fought bravely, but they were all part of a broken system that had chosen pride over peace. Back on Earth, at the burial site of Ambassador Eli Ward, a small memorial was held. Humans stood, silent and solemn. The revenants had done their work. The galaxy would never forget what had happened. The Supreme Commander, his face hard but resolute, stood at the front. He spoke only a few words. Justice is not always kind, but it is always necessary. Let this be a lesson to all who think they can take what belongs to humanity. And so, the war that had started with the death of one human, a peaceful ambassador, ended in the fall of an empire. The galaxy would remember this day. The humans had shown the universe what they were capable of, and they would never forget. General Vorak sat alone in his war room, staring at the endless reports flashing before him. Every hour, bad news arrived. Another base gone, another fleet missing, another city emptied without a sound. The proud Xanthari Empire, which had ruled parts of the galaxy for centuries, was falling apart. And they hadn't even seen a full human army yet. General Vorak slammed his fist onto the steel table. "This cannot be," he roared. "How can insects defeat us without even showing themselves?" His officers stood silently. No one dared to answer, because deep inside, they all knew the truth. The Xanthari were losing. Hook. That night, on 10 different Xanthari worlds, the people looked up and screamed. The revenant symbol, the skull and 7 stars, burned across the night skies again. But this time, it wasn't a warning. This time, it was a promise. Across the empire, fear turned into madness. Whole cities locked themselves down. Farms stopped sending food to the military. Factories slowed or shut down. Soldiers abandoned their posts, disappearing into the wildlands. Even some generals started to whisper about surrender. But they were too scared to say it out loud. The word revenant became a curse. Children cried when they heard it. Old warriors who had fought for decades now shook with fear when it was spoken. Meanwhile, humanity continued to strike, always unseen, always deadly. Food convoys disappeared. Weapon shipments exploded. Communication centers went silent. The Xanthari couldn't fight back. They couldn't even find the enemy. It was like battling ghosts. And the worst part, the humans hadn't even sent their main armies yet. Inside Blackstone Command, Earth's hidden stronghold, the Supreme Commander listened carefully to every report. An intelligence officer spoke. "Sir, more than 30% of the Xanthari military has deserted. Entire planets are starting to declare independence. Their empire is crumbling." The Supreme Commander nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "Fear is a weapon stronger than any fleet." He turned to a different officer. "Is Ghost Division ready for the next phase?" The officer saluted. "Yes, sir. They're already in position." The Supreme Commander allowed himself a small smile. "The real blow," he said, "is coming soon." Back among the Xanthari, General Vorak grew desperate. He called for a secret meeting with the last loyal generals. "We must strike Earth directly," Vorak said, his voice cold and dangerous. "If we destroy their home, the revenants will fall apart." The generals hesitated. "Sir," one said carefully, "attacking Earth, it is madness. We barely hold our own territory now." Vorak's eyes burned with rage. "Then we die trying," he shouted. "I will not live to see the Xanthari bow to humans." He ordered the creation of a secret attack fleet, the biggest one left. A final, desperate blow. But humans were already ahead. One night, as the secret Xanthari fleet gathered in the hidden docks of Veltrax 9, the ground itself shook. At first, the soldiers thought it was an earthquake. But then the skies split open. From above, a rain of dark shapes fell, silent, black, and deadly. The Ghost Division had arrived. Using stealth dropships, They landed without being seen. Using special plasma charges, they blew up the docks from within. Using silent rifles, they picked off leaders before the Xanthari could even organize. Within 1 hour, the secret fleet, Earth's biggest threat, was nothing but burning metal. The humans left no survivors. Only a single message carved into the blackened ground. There is nowhere you can hide. When General Vorik heard the news, he knew. Deep in his heart, he knew. The Xanthari Empire was finished. He fell into his chair, silent and broken. His officers looked at him, waiting for orders. But no orders came. Only fear. Across the galaxy, the humans began to move openly. Stealth fleets revealed themselves, blockading important Xanthari worlds. Human colonies, once on the defense, now launched counterattacks. Old allies of the Xanthari switched sides, offering friendship to Earth. The galaxy had changed. And now everyone knew. You do not kill a human and walk away. The cost was far greater than anyone had ever dreamed. Inside Blackstone Command, the Supreme Commander watched it all unfold. He gave a single order. Prepare the final strike. It's time to end this war. And across the stars, the Revenants smiled in the dark. Because the hunt was almost over, and the enemy had already begun to break. Far away from Earth, hidden inside the blackness of space, a small human fleet prepared for battle. They were not like normal soldiers. They wore no bright uniforms. They flew no colorful flags. They were the Ghost Division, the most secret and deadly force humanity had ever created. Each ship was covered with special black plates that made them invisible to most scanners. Their engines were silent. Their weapons were fast and deadly. These soldiers had one mission: strike the heart of the Xanthari Empire without being seen. And they were already on their way. Hook. On the world of Draxel 5, an important Xanthari military base buzzed with life. Thousands of soldiers trained under the twin suns. Warships landed and launched every hour. It was one of the most protected places in the galaxy. No one thought it could ever fall. No alarms rang. No warnings came. But by nightfall, Draxel 5 would be nothing but ash. It started with a single shadow. A small black drone, no bigger than a human fist, slipped past the base defenses. It moved through the air like a ghost, unseen by cameras or guards. It landed on a fuel tank. And silently, it waited. Across the sky, hundreds more followed. Each one carried a tiny bomb. Not strong enough to destroy cities, but powerful enough to cut the heart out of a military base. At exactly 3 o'clock local time, every drone exploded at once. The result was pure chaos. Fuel tanks burst into fireballs. Power generators exploded. Communication towers collapsed. Soldiers screamed as buildings fell around them. Ships that were about to launch were torn apart before they could even lift off. The base, proud and strong just minutes ago, turned into a graveyard. But that was only the beginning. From the shadows, the Ghost Division landed. Wearing black armor and silent boots, they moved through the burning ruins. They had special orders. Take no prisoners. Leave no traces. Destroy everything that could be used against humanity. In less than 1 hour, Draxel 5 was wiped from existence. The Xanthari High Command received the emergency message too late. By the time they sent reinforcements, they found nothing but smoking ruins. Not a single human body was found. Not a single human weapon was left behind. Only the same chilling sign, burned into the ground with plasma fire. Revenants were here. Across the galaxy, fear turned into terror. Xanthari colonies locked down their cities. Merchants refused to fly near human space. Old enemies of humanity suddenly declared neutrality. In secret, some Xanthari leaders even discussed making peace before it was too late. But General Vorik refused. His pride was too strong. His hatred for humans was too deep. He ordered full mobilization. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon, prepared for war. But it was already too late. The Ghost Division had moved again. In a single week, 3 more major Xanthari bases disappeared. Base Rigel 7, known for building war machines, destroyed overnight. Outpost Kira's Edge, the largest fuel station, blown into dust. Training World Vexor, where 100,000 young soldiers trained, emptied without a shot fired. And each time, no human fleets were seen. No traditional battles were fought. Only silence. Only fear. Inside Blackstone Command, Earth's hidden heart of power, the Supreme Commander watched the news reports. One of his generals approached. "Sir," he said, "should we begin official talks with the Xanthari? They may surrender soon." The Supreme Commander shook his head. "No talks," he said calmly. "Not yet. Let them understand what it feels like to be hunted. Let them beg." He looked at the hologram of the Xanthari Empire glowing red. "This is not just war," he said. "This is justice." Meanwhile, in deep space, the Ghost Division received a new target. Xanthari Prime, the capital world, the heart of the enemy. The message was simple. Prepare for the next phase. The revenants are coming home. And across the dark, cold stars, the Ghost Division began to move once again. The real war was only just beginning.